Another issue with China that scares me, frankly, is the race for AI supremacy. Um, I feel like China has such a strong central government, I mean, authoritarian, really, that they are able to make these big swinging decisions. Like, for example, just to invest, they decide to invest all this money in AI technology. And here in other developed countries, we're lagging behind. And you look at, we had a nuclear race, and it could very well be that the next
this could be the next generation nuclear race.
Right. I mean, the next new world will be established by AI. Once you break through on that, and it can start solving its own problems, you all of a sudden you go light years instead of years ahead, right?
Yeah.
And so
you're right to be concerned.
So is that something that leaders are currently working towards, evening the playing field there? Are people thinking about this issue?
There are people thinking about it, but they're not in our government.
Well, that's the problem, right?
Unfortunately. I mean, so we at this point have an innovation model that's very much driven by the leading technology companies.
Mm-hmm.
If you rewind several generations, you had all of these government scientists in lab coats, like buried under a mountain in New Mexico or wherever, like coming up with things. And then now all of those scientists work for SpaceX, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft to some extent. So they are deeply concerned that China is going to leapfrog us in AI. I'm deeply concerned. There was a joke that people in AI used to tell. It was, how far behind is China in AI from the U.S.? And the answer was 12 hours because they would wake up and then see what we did.
Wow.
Now that joke doesn't really work because...
Is it that available? They can just see what we did?
The private companies, they don't make their stuff publicly available.
Right.
But there were some labs and universities that would publish new stuff, and then they would...
And so China was just like, oh, great.
Well, so here's the broader context. The West is better on research and breakthroughs than China. We came up with this machine learning AI development tool that now China has. And machine learning gets stronger and smarter based upon how much data you feed to it. Like data's like food for the algorithms. So China now has a massive lead in the level of data. And China also has a massive lead in the level of computing infrastructure that they make available to their firms. So in China, AI is a national obsession. More Chinese watched AI beat the best human Go player, the Chinese game of Go,
right,
than watched the Super Bowl in the U.S.
Wow.
So AI's massive national and cultural priority.
Is this an effort from the government to get interest in this thing that they see as vitally important to their future success?
Yes.
That's very interesting. It's almost like a propaganda machine.
In this case,
and
though,
it is
they're right and it's smart.
Yeah.
Like I wish we did the same thing. So they have more data, and then the government says, look, we're going to spend billions, even tens of billions of dollars on computing infrastructure as far as the eye can see. Like islands covered with server farms, like straight out of the Matrix. And I've sat with the leading technologists in Silicon Valley who looked at me and said, look, we'll spend $1 billion, $2 billion on computing infrastructure, but we can't spend $10 billion. And that's what the Chinese are doing. And the Chinese are saying, hey, go ahead and use it. AI companies, not our AI, like Chinese AI companies, use this $10 billion infrastructure. You have more data. Now you have more computing power. So our AI will be smarter, faster. And they are generally correct. I asked a group of Iowans last week. I said, okay, so right now they have more access to more data than we do, and they have more computing infrastructure. The only way for the U.S. to win this would be if we have another breakthrough past machine learning. How many of you think that the U.S. is going to take the lead based on another breakthrough? And like no hands went up. And I said, how many of you think that the Chinese will take a lead based upon more data and more computing infrastructure? Like every hand went up. And I looked at them and I said, I agree with you. Like, if you have more data and more computing infrastructure, you're probably going to win this thing. So what we have to do is we have to go to our technology firms, and as president, it'll be my pleasure to do this. I'll say, look, we get it. We will match the Chinese multi-billion-dollar computing infrastructure, take it off your balance sheets to maintain global leadership in this field. And in return, then we'll ask them for a few things too. Essentially, we'll ask them to allow us to have someone that keeps them from destroying humanity or doing something that
Something
really
small like that.
really. So I sat with a technologist who said to me flat out, he said, look, our incentives right now on AI are just to go as fast as possible because we're competing with the other tech firms, we're competing with the Chinese. And if all of our incentives are to go as fast as possible, at one point, one of us is going to do something really problematic / disastrous. And
Do you have
and he said, like, please, we could use some guidelines on this, because if you put guidelines on us and the other firms we're competing against, then we'd be less likely to break something.
Right. Worried about the other guys, probably. What is one of these scenarios, for example, where someone who's moving too fast in the development of AI does something that becomes harmful, disastrous to our society? What's an example of that?
So you could have AI that, I mean, I don't want to scare people, but
Go ahead. Let's get scared.
so let's just say, so I'll just say something that, like, you could have weaponized AI that can hack just about any public infrastructure that you can't encrypt and protect because the AI is sophisticated enough where it can break through. And then you could imagine if that AI gets into the wrong person's hands or wrong organization's hands, then it could be essentially like holding our infrastructure hostage. Or maybe not even holding our infrastructure hostage, maybe just set it loose. And then we wind up with the lights off for quite some time. I mean, there are scenarios like that. There are other darker scenarios around, and these are more the science fiction level, where like the AI gets its own agenda. But there are realistic scenarios where AI does something it's not intended to do in ways that that does very large scale damage.
I'm thinking now. I want to think practically about what this means. So China is we're in an AI race, arms race. What's the end game? Is it hacking? Is it digital warfare? I mean, what is it that will give them the edge, practically speaking?
So if you were to win in AI, economy-wide, that would mean that you could accomplish efficiencies of scale that other economies would not, and that your firms would be smarter, your software would be more effective, everything would just start working better. And then it's very hard to compete with that if you are another country. Let's imagine, for example, that you had AI that had figured out mobility to the point where you could have autonomous trucks and cars everywhere. And then there was one country that had that software and it was actually safe. The level of savings for an economy of having autonomous vehicles would be hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And so if you had access to that software and then say, hey, this will save your economy hundreds of billions, I'll license it to you for 20 billion, 30 billion, or whatever it is, then other countries would start doing that. And then that would be...
They're the new... it's the new oil, as you say.
Yeah, data is the new oil.
Yeah.
And so if you had the AI and you could harness the data effectively, then you win at an almost unprecedented scale.
That sounds important. I mean, it sounds important. That's real money.
No, that's why the Chinese are essentially obsessed with this.
I mean, they're looking for ways that they can become the new world player.
Yeah.
And I think they see that as almost like a cheat code to piggyback to the front of the line.
It's like, how many of you...
It's like a Hail Mary.
I'm sure you all do. Like, sure you do, Ethan. Maybe not you, Eli. Like, you played one of those video games where you're like trying to upgrade your your units and like, you're competing against this other force.
Yeah,
But,
well, I've played many games like that.
I know you have. Me too. So AI is like that, where it's like, oh man, I'm starting to fall behind. It's like, ooh, if I get this new unit type,
You
like,
got
if
that.
I had to upgrade that.
Right. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, AI is like that for the Chinese.
I mean, it seems concerning that that is not even a topic on the debate, or that
Well,
no one really talks about it.
Except for this guy. Nah, I agree with you. The fact is, our government is 25 years behind in technology. Our media companies
and all the politicians are 25 years too old, if I'm being honest. I mean, I don't want to sound ageist, but I also don't mind if I sound ageist either. Because I think politicians they're too old. You know what I mean? I want someone. There's too much going on in the world. I mean, Joe Biden probably has an @AOL.com email.
Yeah, maybe.
Most likely he does.
Joe's 77, I want to say. So he's like our parents.
Right, and that terrifies me.
So if your parents have,
You understand their technological literacy. That's not who you want up against the Chinese AI machine.
Yeah, it's not just the folks who are on the stage. I think someone looked up the average age of a congressperson or a legislator in D.C., and I think it was 60, something like that. So
Why is that? What's going on? Are young people not getting in the game? Are people not electing young people? I know that there's kind of a second wave now, but I just think that our government body wasn't meant to be run by
the olds.
by old people who don't really understand. And more than ever, maybe 100 years ago, the technological aspect wasn't
as
important, and the landscape wasn't moving as fast, and wisdom and old age and good.
There is a technical term for this. It's the gerontocracy. It's like the rule by old people. And the U.S. is, I believe, technically a gerontocracy.
Wow. How about that?
It's not great. I mean, again, and it's tough because, we like old people.
We love the olds. I feel like that's like a slur. The olds.
But the rate of change is just accelerating. It's getting faster all the time.
Yeah.
So if you could afford to be 10, 20 years behind, like a number of decades ago, you can't afford to be 20 years behind now, because what the heck happened in the last 20 years? The world has changed. And right now, the government in the U.S., unfortunately, is like the flopping appendage behind like the rest of, it is like the tail, and like the animal is moving forward, and the tail's like, hey, me too, me too. And that's not going to work ideally for us in terms of some of the biggest problems, like AI, like climate change, like some of the folks, the problems that you genuinely need a federal government that has its act together. And that's where we are right now as a country. That's why I'm running for president, because I looked up and said, okay, here are the big problems. You can't solve them unless the government gets its shit together. The government will not get its shit together. And then be like, all right, so what's the plan?
Somebody's got to do something.
And so then I said, well, if I run for president and bring enough Americans together fast enough, then we can get into D.C., rewrite the operating system, try and modernize and upgrade it, just be all about solutions, data-oriented, modernize it. Someone told me a story. It was like an Asian kid. He went to work in D.C. in one of these congressional offices, and then they gave him some work to do about like opening mail or like entering like something into a form. So then he, being a smart kid, he like wrote a script where then it like did itself, and then they yelled at him for it. They were like, no, you were just supposed to enter it into the form. He was like, I just made it so that no one needs to enter it.
They didn't understand.
Yeah, I didn't understand. And then, now that kid works in Silicon Valley at Google. But he said, like, I worked in the government for
That's insane.
for a few months, and he was like, it was terrible.
That's
Here's what
outrageous.
happened to me.
Yeah.
And this was in a congressperson's office. D.C. is embarrassing.
That's outrageous. I mean, that it's funny, but it's also terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I get in there and can try and make it, like what I was saying to that kid is, I was like, look, man, we have to like essentially have a kid like you in every congressperson's office.
We need
And
to
then
look for you.
Yeah.
We need to embrace you.
And to get you in there and being like, hey, he's just going to try and make stuff work a little better and faster, and just see how it goes, and then just try and push the culture forward. You can't change it overnight, but I think you can get a lot done faster than people think, because they're so far behind. Like, you almost can't help but do good in that situation.